Hello and welcome to The Exchange, where we invite leaders in their field to join us to discuss topics of interest to all of us in our everyday lives. I'm Rob Buckingham and my co-host on The Exchange is my wife, Christie.
It's great to be here today. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the difference between the generations in their values, work ethic and influences. We're also going to take a look at the issues that link the generations together.
To discuss this topic, we're very happy to be joined by Bernard Salt, an author and trend forecaster. Welcome to you, Bernard.
Hi, guys.
It's great to have you with us.
Pleasure.
We're also thrilled to be joined by author and social commentator Michael McQueen. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, before we get started on our discussion today, let's take a look at this.
What concerns the generations? Well, let's define them first. Baby boomers were born following World War II from 1946 to 1964. Generation X were born from 1965 to 1980, and Generation Y were born from roughly 1981 to 1994. Do baby boomers care about social media? Do Gen X have a strong social conscience? And is healthcare at all relevant to Gen Y? What are the issues that matter to the different generations?
Oh, I love this topic. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and very
Absolutely.
practical today. Let's start with you, Bernard. What do you see as the major concerns of different generations?
Well, I suppose the concerns of different generations are how to relate to other generations. Baby boomers, I think, are struggling with relating to Generation Y in the workforce. Baby boomers very hierarchical, deferential, waited their turn to get to the top job. Along come Generation Y, and they have these big expectations. They don't want to pay their dues. They want to actually move up the corporate ladder much quicker than preceding generations, and I think that lack of patience, if you like, in Generation Y really concerns the baby boomers.
It can create some resentment.
It creates resentment, and particularly Generation X, people caught in the middle. They see Generation Y as being upstarts, and they see baby boomers pandering almost to Generation Y.
It's fascinating.
It's leading to some intergenerational tension in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating thing with Gen Y, who are always asking why.
Yeah.
Is it that they don't respect the authority, or they really genuinely are curious?
They're genuinely curious. I mean, you think that Generation Y are the kids predominantly of the baby boomers. And so Gen Y are everything baby boomers wanted for their kids. They challenge authority, they question why, and it's not necessarily an affront to that authority or trying to undermine the status quo. They've been conditioned to always be seeking alternatives. So they talk about them being the postmodern generation. So it's not about black and white, these sort of concepts of truth that are absolute, but it's all open to negotiation. Okay. So they're always looking to negotiate and discuss and understand.
Do you think the values differ, Bernard?
Well, I do think that the circumstances are genuinely different between the generations. The baby boomers were born in the 1950s, one of 5 or 6 kids, if you like. Dad worked, mum did not work. Whereas Generation Y were one of 1 or 2 kids, for example. They didn't have many brothers or sisters. Mum and dad worked, so you had a much more financial largesse in the family. And of course, they were able to afford much more for the Generation Y kid than for the baby boomer kid. So you could argue that there is a big shift in consumerist values between the baby boomers and Generation Y.
Yeah, interesting.
What do you see were the key influences that shape each generation, Michael?
Well, I think if you look particularly at Generation Y, they're a group who grew up in the era we look at retrospect as dubbed as the era of self-esteem. And so a big influence for this group were messages like, you know, you are special, you're magnificent, you can do anything you want to do.
They're all so special that nobody's actually special anymore.
Even the idea of you can be a leader. Every Gen Y is going to be a leader. I don't know who's following, but they're all going to be leaders.
And all have their own businesses that are successful.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And retire
because
at 40.
of that, yeah, and because of that, there's often this sense of what can seem like entitlement at times, but also a craving of that feedback, craving of the pat on the back. Yeah, and I think this leads to the whole social media phenomenon. You know, what's social media? It's about getting feedback.
Yep.
Yeah, biggest fear, put something on Facebook or take a photo of the meal you just cooked and put it on Instagram, and for no one to say anything. Because it's about getting this, they've given me constant praise their whole lives, and now they often crave it as a generation.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I'm a boomer, but I enjoy some of that as well.
Well, I think that the baby boomers had a very different experience. This is they were raised by people who had touched the Great Depression, who had fought in the Second World War.
Yes.
The only way that those people survived the first half of the 20th 20th century was by deference, by fitting in. It was a command and control economy. You did your bit and survived that way. John F. Kennedy, 1961, in his inauguration speech said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country."
Yep.
He was speaking to that frugal generation
Yes.
about sharing, about putting your shoulder to the wheel for the whole community to survive. A generation later, Gen X and Gen Y, well, you're special, you're unique. What can we do for you rather than what you can do for us? There's been a shift in generational values over the course of half a century.
And that comment that you've just mentioned, how does a Gen Yer interpret that comment?
Well, I think that the big thing is there's a lack of duty often. You know, the whole notions of duty and, you know, conforming to the greater good and being subservient to the greater good. You look at organisations like, you know, Rotary International, Apex, Lions. The key challenge they're facing is that you look at Rotary's motto, it's service above self.
Yeah.
And it was all driven by that sense of I should give back to society. You've got a generation coming through who want to volunteer. They get involved in causes, but not because they feel like they should. They owe a debt to society, but I want to change the world.
They feel as if they can contribute.
That's right, yeah.
So some of those organisations you've mentioned may need to position themselves or brand themselves in a different way.
Absolutely, and they're looking to do that right now. I mean, that's the challenge. Most Rotary clubs, if you walk in the door, the average age is sort of 60, 65 plus, and they're not even attracting many baby boomers, much less Gen X, and certainly not Gen Y. And the challenge for them, like any organisation, if you're not constantly filling with newer, younger, next generation members, just add 20 years and you don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge they face.
Bernard?
One of the key groups of volunteers in any society, according to census results, are in fact people in their 20s. Now, I'm not quite sure whether in fact this is because they want to give back to society or whether in fact it looks good on their CV. They're actually building a profile. This is a curated profile, if you like, to lead to greater success later on.
And it also, when you're giving out beyond yourself, it makes you feel good.
Well, there is that sense, and also I suppose it's very difficult to get into the workplace, and the way of getting into the workplace is by work experience, doing an internship, if you like, by volunteering. It's seen as an entree into the workplace these days.
The bosses are probably going to be Xers or boomers, so that is going to impress them, the fact that they've put duty before self.
Well, very much so. And in fact, I think many employers look for a contribution to society. And it's almost as if Gen Y is going on and ticking boxes. Yes, I've done the volunteering bit, done the gap year overseas, I've learnt the second language. Now, where is my corporate office?
Now, in fairness to Gen Yers, we work a lot with Gen Yers, and I actually feel like I'm parenting them. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm married to a boomer.
And
I just love them. I just think they're gorgeous. And I think, like what you said, they need feedback. They need to know that what they're doing, because almost like as if their parents didn't, out of whatever reason, didn't teach them some of these basic skills.
Well, I think if you're an only child, you've got two parents heaping their love, attention, money, largesse onto that child, and you become addicted to it. The Chinese have a term for this with their one-child policy. They call it the little emperor syndrome.
Yes, a little princess, absolutely.
2 parents, 4 grandparents heaping love and attention on a single kid. By the time that kid gets to 25 or 26, they become addicted to that sort of feedback.
That's fascinating. We've looked at the differences between the generations. Are there any similarities?
Well, I guess fundamentally we're all human, and so you can look at.
That's a good similarity.
Some would question whether Gen Ys are, but I mean, fundamentally our desires are the same. I think that what we see are the things that divide us or make it difficult to connect across the gaps are some of the things around the messaging that groups have been given. And I think one of the big ones, we talk about mental health a lot in youth, young people. And you think of the fact that an older generation were raised being told that essentially life was meant to be hard. You know, that whole message of life was never meant to be easy. And so, and yet you've got a generation who've been raised basically being told the opposite. Life is meant to be fair, easy, convenient, exciting.
So what happens when it's not?
And so when it's not, often the conclusion is, and this goes to the real heart of the whole theme of mental health, is there must be something wrong with the goal or the path that I'm on. So wrong course, wrong relationship, wrong job, wrong career, because if it was a right one, it'd be easier. Or there's something wrong with me. And so there's some of the things that are causing issues, because you see parents who look at their kids who are maybe 3 months off the end of school and the kid says, oh, I'm over it. Because obviously if the academic thing was meant to be for me, it'd be easier than this. And the parent's like, are you serious? You've got 3 months?
Yes.
Just stick at it.
Yeah.
And that's the tension, because the messaging or fundamental beliefs can be so different.
We're going to a break, but just a quick comment from you on that, Bernard.
I wonder whether, in fact, Generation Y won't ultimately be known as the disappointed generation. If you are told you're special from the age of 5, what happens by the age of 35 and you turn out to be quite ordinary? You're not running the country, you're not running some great corporation.
That's a great
You
thought.
are disappointed by middle age.
Wow. That's a scary thought, isn't it? Great conversation. We'll be back with more in just a moment on The Exchange. Welcome back to The Exchange. We're having an interesting discussion with Bernard Salt and Michael McQueen about the issues that link the different generations. And you and I were a little staggered by something
Absolutely.
that
I
Bernard
was a
said
little bit
before the break.
alarmed when you said that the Gen Y could become the disappointed generation when they reach about 35. What can we do about that?
Well, I think we need to educate Generation Y that their expectations may not be realistic. They need to recalibrate their expectations.
Do we sound like the dream killers then?
Well, no, I don't think about dream killers. I just think we need to be more realistic. I think Generation X mothers are particularly good at this. Look, kid, I work, get over it, you're not special, that's the way it is. They're very, very forceful in terms of the way they manage their household. The only way a Generation X household will work is everyone pulls their weight if 2 partners work. Whereas Generation Y, raised by baby boomer parents where the mother may or may not have worked, it's a little more indulged, if you like. Perhaps set unrealistic expectations in life.
That's describing our household. It really is.
I think the thing about setting them up for success, or at least helping them when they get that stumble, which is the moment of realisation, one of the big keys that something we're not doing very well is sharing stories. You know, to actually passing experiences from one generation to the next. And, you know, if every generation thinks they're the first to have ever faced a hardship or a disappointment, and at that moment, I mean, you can get alongside a young person and go, it's all right, suck it up. That tends not to really help. But if you share an experience of times that maybe you face something similar to that, the power of narrative is huge, particularly with a postmodern generation where it's all about your personal experience. Experience speaks volumes, so narrative is a key way to teach and coach this group.
Let's touch on social media and technology. Has that created a dividing line between the generations?
Or is that a bit of a generalisation, do you think?
Well, I certainly think in some matters of technology, Generation Y were first to master forms of social media, for example. But I would argue that Generation X and certainly baby boomers are fast learning.
Yeah.
It comes in through the 20-somethings and the teenagers and then spreads very quickly.
Right.
I don't think Generation Y own any particular social media at the moment.
No,
you
fair
agree with that,
question.
Probably, absolutely. It's probably the way they use it that's a bit different. I mean, you see, for instance, I'll take 75 photos so I get just the right angle so that my life looks the most glamorous and
perfect.
exciting. That's a far more narcissistic Gen Y way of using social media. I don't see that as much in older generations for whom it's functional, it's keeping in touch, keeping abreast of what's going on.
So you're saying I should stop doing that?
Well, you know, if it takes 75 photos, that's the issue.
We've got a question from Facebook, and that is, which generation works the hardest?
Well, I have a view on that. I'm not sure that it's any particular generation. I think it's a particular time in the life cycle. So whether you're a baby boomer generation or Generation Y, it doesn't really matter. People between about 35 and 48 put in the most hours per week. You've got young families, young kids, you're peaking in terms of your career. The people, and at the moment that would be Generation X, but in due course it will be Generation Y, maybe another 10 years, when they have to put their shoulder to the wheel and support a family, pay off a mortgage, do all that boring stuff that we've already done.
And are they going to have their eyes opened and an epiphany and go, this is what they were talking about?
Well, I suppose this is the argument of the disappointed generation. All that aspiration of youth suddenly comes into sharp focus when you're middle-aged with a mortgage and with a family.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, some people will in fact achieve their dream, but many people won't. Maybe that is the transition from youth to middle age.
Great discussion, and we're going to go out on the street right now to find out what the people have to say about this.
Today on the streets, we're going to ask what concerns the different generations. You're a baby boomer. Tell me, what is the biggest issue facing your generation today?
I think the biggest issue is worrying about our grandkids and what the future they have, because the way the country's going at the moment, I'm really scared for them.
Job market and education.
People living within their means, credit cards and, you know, all this sort of, people just spending more money than they have and getting themselves into trouble.
You're a baby boomer. Tell me, what is the biggest issue concerning your generation?
Dying. Trying to pay off my uni fees at the moment, I think, is probably a big thing. Trying to find a good job.
I guess, I'm around the age of around 20, and you get involved in the party scene a bit, and I'd say just amongst my social group, it's kind of a stage where people start testing drugs.
So you were born pre-war. Tell me, what is the biggest issue concerning your generation today?
Well, I don't know. It's a general observation on my part is that I just feel there's a diminishing of style, general manners, an appreciation of ladies. No one will give their seat up in a train these days for a lady. It just doesn't happen.
I have 2 small children and I would be concerned about their level of education so that we are ranking up where we need to rank in the rest of the world, because it is a world stage that they're going to be working in.
Probably one of them would be the environment and the economy.
Probably the ageing factor today, the world moving away from you as you get a bit older. That's pretty much it.
You can go to the opera, you can go to theatre, and people turn up in shorts and thongs. That used to be an absolute no-no for me as a kid.
Does technology concern you today? I'm
still living in the 60s, very happily. I don't have a mobile phone, I've never sent a text.
Do you know how to operate a fax machine?
A what? I've only just learned to use the toaster.
Gotta love that. What's a fax machine? That is so good. Some great comments there. It's welcome to our Street Talk reporter, Sandra Cavallo.
How you going?
Really good. Love the guy that just went dying.
Yes, I loved it, because then you speak to the 20-year-old who's like, I'm into the party scene, into taking drugs, so virtually killing themselves, whereas the older generation's like, I'm trying to stay alive. So the disparity.
There was one exception there. That young guy was actually, he was very realistic about people overspending. Like, is that normal among Gen Yers, would you say?
I wouldn't say as a general rule, no. I mean, this is a generation who've had far more financial products marketed to them from the get-go, from much younger ages. I mean, getting your first part-time job and sort of just entering the age where you can get a credit card and they offer you a $4,000 limit. I mean, those sort of products didn't exist 30 years ago. And so there's a lot more indebtedness, and also a generation who, of course, didn't get free education. And so they're starting their careers often way behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that the thing that I took out of that was that I think it's the role of every middle-aged generation at any time in history to lament the youth of today. The loss of manners, not getting up to... I think this was going on a generation, 2 generations ago. So I think it's a measure of middle age.
I think you're spot on, because I even spoke to a wire last night because we were talking about the whole issue of mobile phones, and I was saying, get used to the idea, because you're a Gen Xer coming home to the child and they're saying, Mum, you're on the phone. I said, get used to it. This is the way of the future. I can drive this and talk to you at the same time.
Well, it is a perennial battle. I mean, I think it was Socrates in something like 400 BC was quoted as saying the youth of his day were, and then the list that formed is the same list that you'd get wandering around the streets today. Disrespectful, don't know their place.
The difference is that baby boomers know that it's real for us.
That's
exactly
previous
generations.
Well spoken.
Exactly.
Were there any issues that you heard that you thought, that's pretty spot on with what we're having to face today?
Well, what I took out of it also was the 20-something being concerned about society, the economy and so forth. At that time in the life cycle, you are worried about a job, whether you can afford a mortgage or whatever. So you're trying to build a life. By the time you get to 50, you're looking back and saying, well, the standards aren't what they once were. So I think, all of the comments were pretty typical, I would have thought, of people at that stage in the life cycle. I'm not convinced that this is a generational thing, as opposed to a stage in the life cycle thing. 20-somethings think like that, 50-somethings think like that, regardless of what time in history you're in.
That's a really good thought. Absolutely.
It is. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Well, some fantastic discussion there and some great comments from the street. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sandra. We'll see you next time. And we'll be back with more on The Exchange in just a moment. Welcome back to The Exchange. We're talking with trend forecaster Bernard Salt and social commentator Michael McQueen about the issues that link the generations.
Bernard, tell us, what are some of the good things about the generations, if you can pinpoint them, that we can learn from?
Well, I think the good thing about Generation Y is that they are highly educated, mobile, fluid, agile in their thinking. They see the world through chaotic opportunities, if you like. If you look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who invented, what is it, Facebook,
Yep.
27 or so, didn't go through Harvard, saw the opportunity and created it. And I think that's the strength of Generation Y, chaotic opportunities. Baby boomers, on the other hand, very methodical, very deferential, shoulder to the wheel, very solid, produced the goods. I think that was the right generation for the late 20th century, but we need a different model. A Generation Y model, people who think outside the square. And that's why I think Generation Y are the right generation to prosper and do well in the 21st century.
Fantastic. Would you agree with that, Michael?
Absolutely. I mean, Generation Y are the group who have been taught to ask why. And if you think about it, that question of why do we do things the way we do it? That's the key to innovation, creativity.
Yep.
And you see in the workplace this is the case. Gen Ys come in and look at the status quo and challenge it. And often what they do is they remind everyone else that that's the question we should all be asking ourselves constantly anyway. And they're the ones that do it naturally. So we can learn a lot from them when it comes to that, thinking outside the box, that creative view of life, definitely.
Yeah. But we still need the boomers and Xers, don't we?
We do indeed.
Yeah.
You need every generation. And in fact, I think society is enriched by having demographic diversity.
Yep.
You talk about ethnic diversity and cultural diversity. Age diversity also, I think, creates a more lively society. 60-somethings make a contribution, just as 20-somethings.
Yep.
We should value them all.
Very true. Now, we've got, after Gen Y, of course, we've got Generation Z and then the Alpha generation. What would be your predictions for the future?
Well, I think one of the things we're already seeing in the early stages of is perhaps a shift back towards something that's a little more conservative. And I think we're actually going to see a shift away from this hyper-protectionism, because, of course, we've had the helicopter parent phenomenon that is, within schools has gotten out of control. I mean, the number of teachers now who will report, a student gets in trouble, messages home to their mum to protest the injustice. Next thing, the parents are at the school with a family lawyer. I mean, there are multiple stories in recent times. I've spoken to school principals, the family lawyer rocks up. And so we were already seeing a correction of that. So Gen X, younger Gen X and older Gen Y parents who are thinking this doesn't work. We've got to address this, become more realistic in the way we approach risk. And I think that's going to be one of the shifts in a positive way that we'll see.
Yeah, very good. Bernard?
I think that we'll see in Generation Alpha the truly global generation, the global citizen, I think, particularly out of the Western countries, communities. People are highly educated, mobile, living and working in one country at one stage in life and then moving into another. And quite aspirational and competitive. We will see the West competing more with the East. So global, competitive, fluid, agile, aspirational people will be Generation Alpha.
So some good things for the future.
Absolutely. It's always good, always positive. And that's the human condition, the human spirit, I think. We're always looking to improve and to be better.
Very true. Bernard and Michael, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely wonderful. Please go to our website for fact sheets and for more information about this show, The Exchange. We look forward to seeing you next time.
See you then.